Welcome everyone to IU's 14th lunch talk. I'm really proud to announce that since its inception now almost, the IU has held monthly lunch talks which have featured experts from around the world on areas that are related to climate change, to development, to evaluation, to methodological advances. In this context, we are going to have a lunch talk next month as well, and so I'm going to encourage all of you to keep a lookout for that. But before we talk about that, I want to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Zazueta, who is actually someone that I have known for now more than
20 years.
20 years. Aaron doesn't look that old, but what can I say? Aaron, we are really fortunate to have Aaron here in a multiplicity of roles. First, he's also advising us and supporting us on a very critical evaluation that the IU is doing on the review of the results management framework. And so we decided to take advantage of that and have Aaron here. Aaron used to be the Chief Evaluation Officer of the Global Environment Facility and has worked on and has developed expertise on evaluating complex and transformational programs and projects and initiatives. And has also, and the talk that he's going to give today is basically on an impact evaluation in a very, very complex environment. So I hope all of you are as excited as I am. Before I go forward, I do want to encourage you all to know that we do have the IU does have a Twitter handle. I encourage you to tweet, because if you tweet, you learn more. This is scientifically proven. So please take messages that are coming out from Aaron's talk and tweet them using our handle. I'm also going to encourage you all to think about other topics and areas that you'd like to see featured at the IU talks. And we're happy to think with you about who we can get and who we can invite. And and I should just get in touch with the IU and my other colleagues who are all spread out around the room to co-think and co-plan as to what we can do subsequently. With that, I'm Jo. I head the Independent Evaluation Unit, and I'm really pleased to have you all here. This talk is recorded and will also be available on our website, and it is currently also being transmitted through BlueJeans. With that, I'm going to invite Aaron to do his thing. So it'll be for about 20 minutes, Aaron, and then we'll open it out for Q&A. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jo. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And let me just a few words of introduction. This evaluation, basically, it evaluates about 20 years of support of the GEF around the globe to protected areas. It's perhaps the biggest evaluation ever done on biodiversity, and it will be done for a while because it was, you will see, it's very, very complex. So what I will do now is I will give you the tip of the iceberg, basically, because it has many ramifications, the evaluation. And what I was thinking about I have several presentations, of course, of this evaluation. I was thinking which one to present, and in consultation with Andreas, we decided that perhaps the best one is the one that we presented to the GEF Council, because that actually is for a more generic public, doesn't go too much into the technical aspects, but we can talk about some of the technical aspects that may come up. But it tells you about basically what type of results we were able to come up with. Basically, the key thing is what we're trying to do with this evaluation was to try to understand what were the impacts on biodiversity conservation in protected areas and their immediate landscapes. Of course, this is the impact of the GEF support in these areas. What were the contributions to the broader changes the GEF was making into these processes as well? Because we weren't just interested in the protected area as such, but also in the protected area system in the country. these two things are very much linked, we found out. And what were the conditions that enable or hinder biodiversity protection, particularly when we're talking about interactions with human populations? That were our three main, those were our three main questions that we wanted to get at. These were issues actually in which the GEF was very much interested. The first one, of course, has to do, okay, what happened with this $2.5 billion that we have invested on this. The other one basically is how are we going about doing this? Is this having a transformational effect or not? And the other one, of course, has to do with the with learning how to do it better. Now we had several methodological challenges and big ones actually, and I will not belabor this because it was many a nights of headaches of this evaluation. The evaluation took about 2.5 years to do, and the basic problem is just the amount of gaps of information of GEF support. Yesterday you were complaining about your system, you know, with the GEF, my God, you know, I mean, there's all these projects for which I mean, these were projects supporting protected areas, and there was no record as to where the support was given. You know, just very simple questions as to where and when and how much. I mean, we're not talking about sophisticated information for evaluation. It's a very basic information that needed to be obtained. We had a lot of problems obtaining it. We did end up getting it for a lot of, but after a lot of work. But there were other when looking at global databases, for example, our projects is not always matched with the protected areas in the global databases. We used a lot of big data in this evaluation, basically, and you know, the global databases of the IUCN and other agencies. So there was a problem in the matching. So it took a while to get all these things sorted out. And of course, there was a huge problem in the counterfactuals, basically. So we basically had a problem with identifying what was a GEF supported protected area in a non-GEF supported protected area. I mean, that's very basic. I mean, but this is the kind of stuff that you actually face when you are doing such a big evaluation. Maybe not in a country, maybe not in one protected area, but when you're doing working with thousands of protected areas, then all of these issues become a real problem. Otherwise, you don't know what you're evaluating really, what you're comparing. But we were able to actually mitigate many of these challenges by following a truly multidisciplinary approach and mixed methods. And this is mixed methods with capital M, as you will see. We used basically most of the methodological resources that are available for evaluation up to now. And what was our? If we have a theory of change, but this is a simple version of the theory of change, basically. And this came out of a wide review of the literature. So we were trying to boil down what is the main things that we're doing to keep a focus throughout the evaluation. We wanted to be clear, of course, behind each one of these conditions. There are more cause effect relationships. But we basically what we're finding in the literature is that good governance, effective management, and community engagement improve biodiversity. So okay, is this happening or not? Basically, we went we structured much of our evaluation this way. Now another thing is that this was sort of like the original direction that we took. But as we moved along, things become pretty much confirmed as we were going. And of course, there were we were doing some adjustments around the edges, basically. But the idea was we're always confirming whether we were going in the right direction, basically. That was an aspect of the evaluation, given the complexity of what we were facing. Now, So what did we do basically? We're going to look at the different data sets. We had a global component that basically look at forest cover as a major indicator, wildlife abundance in the of specific species in the protected areas, and the management effectiveness tracking tool, which is a tracking tool that or basically a monitoring tool that is used for protected areas widely around the world, and it's basically supported by a group of scholars and NGOs, and the GEF has been supported for a long time. It turned out to be quite a disappointment, actually. That, of course, people didn't want to hear that, and that became very unpopular with many people over breaking people's careers and things of that sort. But it was the case. I mean, there were a lot of gaps and very complicated to use, etc. But anyway, this was one of those fiascos of monitoring that has a lot of invested for many years, and then when the time comes to use it, the beef was not there, actually. Then we have the portfolio component, and basically on the portfolio component, we look both at remember, we're talking about 25 years of GF engagement here. So during those 25 years, the approach of GF changed, and we were actually trying to understand how it changed and why it changed. At the same time that we were looking at what was happening with the projects on the ground, basically. And we did an analysis that we call progress towards impact, which is to what extent the projects are building the conditions that are leading to long-term change and transformation, besides the actual biophysical aspects of impact, but really going beyond that to a transformation. And we did case studies as well. The case studies were particularly useful to understand what were the GF contributions to the process, and what were the contextual factors taking place. Now, we looked at contextual factors also in the other parts, but it was more clear in the case studies. Now, these are the type of methods that we use. We use both natural and social sciences, qualitative and quantitative, a lot of spatial analysis. For those of you that are familiar with remote sensing and forestry issues, we use the Hansen data sets. Hansen and the University of Maryland, at the time, it was the most advanced work done in forestry, and it had problems, the work, but it definitely was the best work that had been done. And by the time we worked with Hansen's team, basically, they had actually corrected many of the problems that they initially had been people had been pointing at. So we benefit from all of that. And just to give you an idea, we actually compared I think it was about 3,000 GF protected areas with 30,000 non-GF protected areas, pixels of 10 meters. You can imagine the amount of computer power that took, basically. We were using Maryland's computer, which is a super powerful computer, and that was the most powerful computer in the United States at the time as well. So that aspect was really state of the art, basically. And we did actually for other things. We did some propensity score matching for Mexico, the protected areas in Mexico. We actually again did about comparing about 15 parameters, basically, and matching the specific squares in and out of the protected areas. And then for other things, we did a 50 centimeter resolution, very, very high resolution remote sensing. And as people would joke with me, Aaron, are you counting cows in Mexico? Mm-hmm. Yes, we're counting cows from the satellite, actually, in protected areas. So it was quite an interesting approach, looking at some of these things were proving concepts, whether this type of technologies, you can address drivers and things of that sort. And yes, you can address drivers. And it's all in the record, actually. Basically, it's all in the record of remote sensing. So, but again, we use QCA, which is qualitative comparative analysis. This is not a probabilistic, but a deterministic methodology. We use that with our case studies. We had 28 we looked at 28 protected areas in 7 countries around the world. So that's a good number to use with QCA. We used, of course, global data sets, the terminal evaluations of 191 GF projects, and many other things, actually. You know, we looked at policies in the countries that we visited, tried to establish the links between policies and protected areas and processes. So these are the countries that we visited, basically, and these are the protected areas. We looked at 17 GF protected areas and 11 non-GF protected areas. We try to find sort of a comparative protected areas. Very difficult to do, actually, because it's very difficult to find. We did not want to use them as controls as such, but we wanted to see, okay, what is happening in a GF and what in a non-GF that would be more or less the same, basically. And we could match more or less for 11 of them, 11 of the protected areas, but not for the 17. At one point, we actually gave up because it was taking a long time. We had to go to the field, so we had to continue. Now, the extent of GF support, just to give you an idea what we were doing, about $15 billion of investments over 20 years. 3 billion of these were GF and 12 billion were co-financing. 137 countries, 618 projects, 3,000 square kilometers, and 1,292 non-marine protected areas. And what we did basically, one of the first things we did was to assess to what extent the areas that GF provided support were actually protecting biodiversity. Were in areas that were considered to be biodiversity, or rich biodiversity. And there are maps around the world that actually do this, you know. So that was one of our first GIS experiments, you know. And we did find out that the 58% of the areas targeted by the GF were key biodiversity areas, which is the highest level of biodiversity value globally. 31% were other international designated protected areas. So, and the rest were nationally designated protected areas. So indeed, I mean, we could say, yes, at least the resources are going to the right place. Without this, actually, it wouldn't matter what else GF did. It wasn't protecting biodiversity. It was doing other things, but not necessarily protecting biodiversity. So these are where the protected areas are. You can see they're all over the world. Now let's go to the results of the course. It was we were actually it was quite interesting. We looked at the protected area as such and a buffer of 10 kilometers around the protected area. Now the reason why we looked at the buffer is because you could always have a spillage effect of protection, whereby the protected area is not being affected, but around the protected area you see the impact of a deforestation. What we found is that GF actually fared quite well in terms of the rates of deforestation over the period of from 2001 to 2012, and we used this 2001 to 2012 because this was the data sets that Hansen had, basically. So we were restricted by the availability of the data that existed that had this type of analysis. So basically, GF actually was less than half the loss of forest in the GF. Now we're comparing. What we did here is we're comparing biome within the same country. So they were controlling basically for two variables. Not terribly reliable, but this is what we could do, you know. I mean, but the difference is significant. It's a big difference, and of course we're talking about a lot of protected areas. We're not talking of a few. Now, in the Martians, we see the difference between 3.4 and 4.5. So basically, even in the Martians, you see the GF protected areas in the buffer zones. GF protected areas seem to be doing better. Now, because we didn't think that was sufficient, actually, and of course it was very difficult to really talk about attribution. Although the GEF is not high in attribution, but we were trying to address what has the GEF contributed to the process, at least, and we were trying to do it in terms of actually biodiversity protection and biophysical indicators as well. So we did basically an analysis that was a propensity score matching analysis, and that's actually as rigorous as you can get under this type of circumstance. We had again about 33 variables that we were actually matching, doing the score matching, and what you will see basically is that the yellow, these are the GF sites. The yellow areas and the non-GF sites, the yellow areas are areas where the pixels were matched the red areas of the comparators, basically. So we actually had this was a...
You can stand and...
oh, thank you. Will it work? It's my computer here. Yeah. But the key issue thing is that basically the computer had to actually find for every 10 meters basically of forest, find and match this little sorts. You're talking about billions of operations here in this work, and it took again, it was done through the Maryland computer, and it was done through it was a machine learning process that was used, a algorithm of machine learning basically. So, but here we had some very interesting results. 23% less forest loss in the GEF protected areas. This is much more reliable. Up to 23% loss in 28% less percent loss in or avoided deforestation in tropical forests. That's where it was. We look at different biomes, but in mangroves, GEF was worse. GEF was 20% more loss than the non-GEF areas. So we had to go and look at why was that the case. And clearly, yes, GEF was in areas that were under very, very strong pressure of development for cattle and tourism and other mangroves. Where in Mexico they are under pressure, but not in as much pressure. So. Now we look at that told us about the forest, about the trees, not necessarily about what's happening within the forest. So we wanted to get some indications to what was happening within the forest, and we look at the wildlife abundance data sets of the IUCN and the different committees of IUCN has. And here's where we tried to match our protected areas with the data sets or the sequences that were in this global database, and we actually found, I think it was about 88 matches basically of species with the protected areas. And that was a little disappointing because I actually was expecting big numbers of all of these things, But it took a long time to actually get at really making the matches and things like that. And the actual analysis, if we look at if there is a correlation between GEF, didn't find initially any. We looked at the different variables because we're again looking at variables to explain. No match with variables. So we were poking around to see any indication of what might happen, and we found one eventually. And this one actually was very clear that if a project had within its objectives to address a specific species, the trends tended to be better. Population trends tended to be better. So basically, it was at that level that we had to go basically and find the link. And you can see that we classified the trends in three categories basically: high population, medium, and low basically. Low is that there's not much of an interaction. And you can see the graph there as to where indeed the blue is a higher sort of a presence of the concern for the species and the objectives of the protected area and the project. And those that are the lowest basically is where the link is. So there is a relationship. We couldn't really talk about impact as such, but yes, we can say yes, there is a contribution going on here. This is working. Something here is working. But I also like to point out here. So this is an observation. That is an observation. These are the regression, the trends. But you see here, there are problems. And I actually chose this particular slide to tell you that the data that we had is problems. And what this is showing us is the methods of measurement are different here. So basically, this is where the project started. The GEF project is a version of better, more resources. But anyway, the overall trend seems to confirm that indeed there's. But we had this type of sort of issues, and of course some of the data was imperfect, but some of these trends had to be discarded basically because they weren't telling us what we did. Now, at the level of protected area, what did we look at? And we did confirm basically that strong management was critical. And this is, of course, out of we got much of this from the case studies, but also from the literature. We did a lot of work in the literature. And there were some things that were very, very, very interesting, actually. I mean, the staff, the professionalism of staff was very important, actually. And generally what we found is in the good protected areas or the good protected area systems, actually, because that's very much related to this. You had a very, very high level of professionalism. And in the case of Mexico, which is the one that we went deeper, I'm from Mexico, so I could actually, and I know the country well, and we did a lot of stuff. In the case of Mexico, Mexico has a history of corruption, basically. The forest stuff, but the protected areas were an island of honesty. It was very, very interesting, And they had a saying, and once we started drinking beers and doing over there, and I'm an anthropologist too, so I do my research through beers as well, So when we're drinking beer and talking, they would say, puedes meter la pata, pero no la mano. You can meter la pata means you can make a mistake, but you can make a mistake, meter la pata, but you cannot grab. This was basically we need to be, and it was very for a long time people were actually meeting this. Even now I think they're quite good, and but there are other issues such as, for example, the existence of infrastructure and equipment, the notion of sources of revenue for the protected area, some very, very basic things. But also we found that community engagement was very important. And one of the things that is clear, I mean, the community engagement was important for different things in different areas. For example, in Africa, it was a human-wildlife conflict that needed to be resolved. And it was constant, particularly with the big game. Other places, it was basically fires, getting the cooperation of communities to deal with fires. In other places, it was basically rehabilitation of the ecosystem. In other places, just the issues of law enforcement and reporting when things were not going well. But the key thing actually was that when we looked at the bigger picture, GEF was not necessarily very good at issues having to do with community participation, but they were very good at delivering benefits to the community. This doesn't sound right, but it was actually the benefits that the communities were getting what actually got the commitment of the communities to protection. You know? And it's this. So basically, it's just not being participatory, but delivering benefits. What made the difference. Now, at the national system, basically, we do find the policy development, financial and good HR systems. This is related to the issue of honesty that I was talking about and the capacity of the systems. And this was actually very consistent among the better protected areas, and management approaches as well. They should have real established management approaches in how to deal with the with protected areas, and really be training people and getting everybody on board all the time. Being very it's sort of like going up and down in the system. Oops. Well, this was supposed to be a.
One of the things that I think would have happened with our GEF support, that we would not have got the incremental support in terms of maintaining the quality and quantity area that we set aside as wildlife protected areas. It would have meant that the capacity of the institutions responsible not have been used, and therefore the challenges of encroachment have taken the upper hand. And probably maybe after every 10 years we'll be reviewing wildlife protected area system plans due to reducing its coverage resulting from poaching, among other things, rather from encroachment, among other things.
Okay, so but the key thing basically is when what really made a difference is this interaction of the protected area system with the protected areas and the feedback that came in terms of the learning process. GEF was often providing support, well, 54 countries specifically, providing support to the protected area system, in addition to specific protected areas. But there was a link between what was happening in the protected areas being supported by the GEF and the system. So basically there was a process of socializing that information and ensuring that the systems were being adopted, they were tested in the few protected areas, were being adopted in the broader system. So basically you have here the different scales are being linked and being worked simultaneously across the process. And that actually is what led to the broader adoption. And that's another factor that actually made it very difficult to distinguish between GEF and non-GEF protected areas. So what is it? Because in those 54 countries, all of the system was benefiting from the GEF. So the comparisons that I gave you before provide some underestimate of the actual contributions of the GEF. But that's an impossible thing to really get at. Now, let me move towards the conclusions now. I mean, you can look at the evaluation report. It's in the web, and everything is like. There's much more to be said, but let me talk about what was the contribution of GEF basically, you know, and or what are we learning here, and we wanted to be very straightforward in our lessons basically. So when does GEF catalyze large scale change, transformations basically? Well, you know, it happened when there's a long-term engagement, which GEF actually did. Sometimes you're talking 25 years of engagement in some of these countries since the beginning of the GEF. There's attention to financial sustainability, and it can be in many mechanisms. The GEF was trying many mechanisms. Some are the funds, some were the purposes payments for ecosystems. There were about eight or so approaches. Linking scale approaches and stakeholders. That was a very important aspect, basically. And one thing basically was direct implementation with government, actually, because when you're doing direct implementation with government, you're building the capacities in the protected area system. You're building the capacities in the Ministry of the Environment or whatever ministry is involved, and basically the issue that was really key is when GEF was successful in building capacities for adaptive management of the country, basically. when you see that indeed they were moving they started to move in their own direction, and that actually was happening in particularly some of the most successful countries. Now, our recommendation, basically, I mentioned before the problems with monitoring and with the Met, and one of the big things we said basically is GEF has to move towards geospatial technology. And it was somewhat embarrassing that the GEF was not already when we were doing this, doing geospatial technology. Now they're much more engaged. I mean, this evaluation basically convinced people this is the way to go. This was, and attention to another thing that we found out is that even though the GEF is delivering benefits to the communities, those benefits were unequally distributed, and that of course had a social impact, but also an impact in biodiversity. So more attention should be given to those that are losers. And basically what happened is that those that live outside of the protected area or outside of areas where tourists came are the ones that were paying the cost of protection but not getting the benefits. So this somehow had to be better addressed. And create a program, and for the GEF, basically, we insisted on this issue of create a program of learning on what are the conditions for transformation, basically. This was more difficult to sell, actually. But STOP is interested in this stuff, and the idea was for the GEF to work closely with the rest of GEF to work with the STOP is the scientific and technical panel of the GEF. Another recommendation was to coordinate mandates beyond the environmental sector to address large-scale drivers more. This was already being done, but it needed to be done more, basically. And it varied from one place to another. Depended a lot on the countries as such, but this is something that the GEF should be pushing, which indeed. By the time we were doing this, it was pushing it outside of the protected areas in the landscape management areas, which is a large proportion of the GEF funding as well. But our point was, okay, integrate the protected areas into those approaches as well. And that else is, this is largest funding and number of. Yeah, we did I put this to remind me that as we were finishing the evaluation, the Mexico started making some huge changes in the protected area system that were very, very concerning. So I felt that we were going to report on that as well. Now, recommendation 4, basically, it's important to streamline reporting requirements. Use geospatial technology, partner with national research institutions, which it wasn't being done enough, and measure indicators that are globally meaningful and locally useful, which wasn't really necessarily. The Met was not providing useful material to the countries. And well, thank you very much. This is as I mentioned, the tip of the iceberg of the evaluation.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Such a pleasure. So I'm going to open that up for questions, but just before we do that, I did want to say that this is really exciting for us, mainly because the IU is also going forward with its own program on building its GIS capacity and capability. And we're going to start doing that actually this year, and hopefully we'll continue that next year as well. Yeah, so we're really looking forward to that and to engaging with the rest of the fund. So I'm going to open that up for questions. Go for it, Keith, and then, so we'll take 2 or 3 questions. Keith first.
So, that was a fascinating talk, really stimulating lots of ideas. It's interesting, especially to me, because I was, until last year, running a program to support capacity building in the Mexico Protected Areas program, and specifically on behavior change for local communities and things like fire control,
Mhm.
and in each case targeting a species as a motivating factor.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you said is that yes, targeting species is linked to better results, but that actual community engagement is less important than the economic benefits that the community receives, which was kind of contrary to what we were teaching our CONAM protected area managers. We did get economic benefits, but without the community knowledge, attitude, behavior change, especially behavior change, we wouldn't, the economic benefits wouldn't have translated into behavior.
Yes.
So I'm kind of torn between whether economic man or psychological strategies. Your results say that economic incentives are more important than solidarity incentives, and I just wondered if the data really back that.
Okay, I'll address that. That's a good point.
Thanks, Sarah. Demetri from.
Do you want to put on your mic, Demetri?
Yeah, Demetri from the sub team. Demetri from the sub team. Hello. Hi, everyone. Very nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
And well, I have two questions. One is on the methodology you. The other one is your advice to GCF. First, I mean, yeah, okay, you use the propensity for matching, makes a lot of sense. But exactly the point of using the methodology that you have common support between the counterfactual, the area that didn't receive the treatment, and the one that received the investment from the GEF. And so the question is, have you pre-identified those areas before the GEF financed that project, or you retrofitted those counterfactual after that? And then the other one, based on your experience, what would be the recommendation to us, especially those colleagues like Mark and that are advising the accredited entity on how to bring a good ecosystem forestry project to GCF? What we can do in the first place to assure that we have in mind a good impact evaluation ahead of us.
And one more question before we. Yes, Stefan.
I'm going to keep it short, but not easy. So, my question is, I didn't see this big gorilla in your analysis because you analyzed the GEF impact or initiatives without GEF. But I would be more interested in those kind of broken countries where it was implemented. What was the impact on the rate of population growth? Because I assume that a major impact. If you look at the example in Mexico at the end, or in the interview even, where you heard things are encroaching again, that means it's never safe, it's not necessarily sustainable. And you finish your job. I don't know what's next. What did you find out in that relation?
If you just put on the mic there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No. And
yeah.
On the first question, actually, I would agree with you that indeed you have to do the awareness raising. That indeed this is important, you know. But I think that awareness raising by itself also does not make it. The actual a problem that you see is that much of the orientation in engaging communities has been towards awareness raising and environmental education, particularly in Mexico. And you have a lot of that going on, and it's important. And some people in the communities respond, you know. But ultimately, if you want to bring the big changes, and people need to eat, and biodiversity protection limits their resources to some extent, you know. Another, if you do it right, you know, you have ecotourism or you have income sources, then they see a value in this. But anyway, no, I don't think that necessarily. I'm not that much of an economic man. I would agree with you there, but we found that this was actually something that really tipped the balance, so to speak. Now on your question, you know, these areas were not selected ahead of time. These areas, the control areas were actually selected through, it was a process of we had about 30, well, we knew where the protected areas were, basically. And we had about 30 variables that the computer used to match pixels. And those were the yellow and the red within each one, the blue and the orange protected areas. So those were the pixels. Now, the nice thing about propensity score, about something like this and propensity score matching and using remote sensing is that you really, the data is there. The historical data is there. So you can actually go back, and that is what happened. You know, you don't need to have you don't need to set it up front, basically. You know, but you only have that one parameter, which is the forest cover that you're dealing with. You know, now as remote sensing now, I mean, it's improving when we were doing it. You know, you can now do carbon content of the forest through laser. You can do many other things, basically. And so your parameters will increase, basically. So, but the key issue is that by doing that, basically, you prevent the issue of some not benefiting from development. So in that sense, that's why we use this.
I don't want to get technical, but in fact, the main problem using the design method is the external validity. You don't have what is called common support between who you are going to receive the treatment and who doesn't. I mean, if these two units, they don't have nothing in common, then you find very difficult to have external validity on the finding of your impact evaluation. So how you assure this that you can identify through this spatial methodology that there is this common support between these two groups?
There were 33 variables that we used to compare them. And to, for example, just to give you an example, distance to edge of the forest, population, aspect of the mountain, level of forestation. So we're trying to get as much as possible some comparability, basically, on those variables. In that sense, I think we were okay. It was fine. Yes, remind me again.
The gorilla, the population growth and other factors.
Yeah. Look, I mean, you look at some of these protected areas. For example, Ria Lagartos. In fact, that was an issue that we found. We compare Siancan. You must be familiar with Siancan and Ria Lagartos. I mean, these are both in the peninsula of Yucatan. They both have a lot of mangroves, and they have many similarities, but they have one big difference. And the rate of population growth in the over. That was one, and the other one is the nature of the economic activities of it. In Ria Lagartos, you had a cattle raising, basically. And that really encroaches on the land. Tendency to really, salt mines and things like that. In Siancan, much less population. In a group of people that were oriented towards fishing. They were not as much oriented. So you do find those factors. The same thing in Mariposa Monarca, close to Mexico City. The same. It was a lot of population, real population growth there, but also encroachment. It's very close to big cities. But there, interestingly enough, there was an agreement just before the evaluation was, where indeed everybody seemed to agree on some measures. But how long will that last? There are some areas that are much more vulnerable.
It was not part of the policy work. I think it was project.
Well, it's part of the policy work. part of the policy, how do you deal with in the case of Mexico, for example, if you look at population growth rates, Mexico has gone through a very steep sort of decline in the republic. You don't find as much. So there was an overall policy, but beyond that, I mean, yeah, but the policies were there. They can only stop it so much. The issue eventually becomes economic opportunities. That is ultimately because some of the mega trends of like population can only do so much. In Mexico was doing quite a bit. But I agree with you. Population has been an issue in some specific. Yes.
I should underscore that I don't know of any climate agency or environment agency that actually looks at population policies. With present company included. Yeah, so that's definitely a huge omission in the way climate agencies also think about climate change and what are the best strategies.
Politicians.
Yeah, we have to indicate what is absolutely. I think the bar is very high for evaluations. Any other questions? Yes, please. And if you could introduce yourself as well, and could you use the mic because we are recording this? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, here is when I mean, this is related to this conversation, which is basically the generating benefits to the people, basically generating, and some of the well-being went beyond income. For example, sometimes the protected area provided water, it provided medical services, it provided other benefits that, again, as I mentioned, this was the tip of the iceberg what I presented you, but it varied from place to place and from country to country where the countries were. I mean, to what extent, say, the ministries of the environment were linked to the Ministry of Health, for example, and the policies of the countries to expand health services, etc. The protected area was able to attract those services when they were available, more than areas that were not protected. And particularly the GEF protected areas, they tended to, I mean, it's outside, as you say, outside money absorbs local money as well, So it's we did see that type of benefits taking place.
Okay. Any other burning questions? I'm also going to invite you for maybe 15 minutes if you want to sequester Aaron and just have a conversation with him here. That would be absolutely fine. With that, Aaron, thank you very, very much. This was wonderful.
You're welcome.